Great. So we'll just wait for some people to come in to the webinar. So
I see 29 people already. That's pretty impressive, Steve.
Yeah, so thank you, Wanda and Michael, for joining us tonight to our pub night, virtual pub night. We have a number of guests from around the world, and there's something that we have in common with everybody. Everybody's experiencing, the results of the pandemic and the joys and stresses that go along with it. And I just thought we could start off quickly and talk a little bit about what's been happening in the last 2 months for you guys personally. I know we were here last mid-April. What's been going on in your life, or has it been pretty much the same that it was the previous 2 months?
I'd have to say that things have been okay for me. I've gotten used to life online and social distancing, and I've been delighted by the things I've discovered that you can do with family and friends virtually. Finding things like Jackbox games where the whole family can get on a Zoom call and play really silly party games. And I have an almost daily, not quite as often now, but video calls with my grandchildren. I've actually seen them more often virtually than I did before COVID, because we just thought we'd have to wait till we saw them in person. And they live far enough away, being in Kitchener, that it's not a drop by whenever you feel like a thing. So there are upsides, but of course there are downsides as well. And, it can get lonely. And Zoom fatigue, oh my goodness. That's a very real and present experience on an almost daily basis, isn't it?
How about you, Michael?
Well, similar to Wanda, about the same. Very busy and enjoying most of that, and then also trying to find ways to connect with family and friends by Zoom, and partly successful, and partly I need to keep working at that. And Zoom fatigue. I do group therapy on Zoom, and we have around 8 to 10, maybe, something like that, people, and it's much more difficult, so it's more difficult to do it by Zoom, and people are not as keen to do it by Zoom, but they're keen enough, and we are hoping to start in person within X number of weeks. We don't know how long.
Well, I think most of the people that were planning to attend have come in. I think we'll get a few more in the coming minutes, but I just wanted to welcome everybody here on behalf of Wycliffe College. Pub Night was a monthly event we had here at the college that we partnered with the Meeting House on to talk about theological issues and different topics of interest to broader society. And because of COVID, we had to stop that monthly gathering, but we have the opportunity through technology to continue meeting together and learning together. And so I'd just like to welcome you all here tonight. A few of the little kind of parameters of tonight's discussion. There's an opportunity for anybody to ask any questions, and there's a little question area that the speakers can see. And we'll do our best to answer as many of those questions as we can. We might not be able to answer them all. And if there are a few that are along the same theme, I might paraphrase and group them together. And also Michael and Wanda have both provided some interesting content for tonight as well. And we'll cover some of the stuff we covered before, but some new stuff, hopefully. And hopefully everybody is edified through tonight and we learn something and we learn to manage COVID a little bit better. And also just as we look to society reopening, some of the stresses that will be coming from that. So just again, welcome, and we'll maybe get started. So Michael had provided me, I think actually, like, we've known each other for a few years, and it's almost a yearly occurrence around Christmas that you send out your little piece of paper called Dealing with the Stress of the Holidays. And it's something that I kind of look forward. I know it's time to like make sure I have all my Christmas shopping done, because that's kind of like the signal. And a lot of the things in that document actually apply to our current context. And Wanda and Michael have, reflected a little bit about that. And I thought we could kind of look at that document that Harvard puts out and talk a little bit about some of the context. So I'm just going to share that document with everybody here. And I will do that now. And all right. So you should see a document called Strategies for Coping with Holiday Stress.
I see it.
Nice. And so we'll kind of discuss a few of these points. We'll just go point by point, and talk a little bit about some of the stresses that we might experience being in the COVID pandemic context. And so I'll read it off here. So the first point is to remember that when people have been apart from one another, it can take some time to find a common wavelength. Wanda, did you have some thoughts around that? We're going to be, months apart from each other, coming back to workplaces, coming back to friend groups, to other social gatherings. What are some of the challenges that you anticipate people, experiencing through that?
Yeah. So I think just to start off with, this is a lovely reminder that will really help us when we start to see each other again, that it will take some time to get back on track with one another, and that we should expect some initial awkwardness, especially when we finish telling the story of how things have been for us while we were in lockdown mode. Then it's like, so now remind me what I had in common with this person, and being able to find easy entryways, like going out for lunch together, or finding a project that you can work on with the other person, even playing a board game, or something that would provide some structure to help the transition back to being together in person, could be very helpful. I don't know, it would be interesting to see on the chat what ideas our listeners would have about what they're looking forward to doing with family and friends that they think will help them re-engage and get past that initial awkwardness.
How about you, Michael? Have you thought a little bit about this?
Well, yeah, I have, Steve. I mean, I guess a couple of things. One of the things is that we, Wanda and myself, can't offer any professional or medical advice on this format. So this is just general advice, and if you want some professional advice, you have to go to your own therapist or your own physician. So. But these are fairly common concepts, and I think they're useful. I think that this one I particularly like because family therapists say, how long should you as an adult go back and spend some time before COVID-19 with your family of origin? So you're in fourth year university in engineering, let's say, and it's the holidays, you go back. And with many families, it's fine. There's a little bumps here and there, of course, human beings having lots of differences and so on. But for some students, it would be very difficult to go back for very long. Maybe, and they say, how long should you go back? And some of the family therapists say, it could be 3 days, or it could be 3 minutes or 3 hours. Hopefully not 3 minutes, but so one of the things now is it's not a choice to be with your family for a lot of people. So they're sort of pushed together, and they have to stay together. And so that's a particularly difficult thing if there is some tension in the family. And so, of course, that's a different kind of situation where people have to maybe accept each other, forgive each other more, and maybe don't bring up certain topics.
Right.
Yeah, it kind of lends itself to the second point where it talks about spending time with people who understand you and appreciate you for who you are. You might be forced into a situation where that's not true.
Right, exactly.
And how would you advise somebody that's dealing with that kind of environment where they do feel judged or misunderstood by the people that they're kind of stuck with?
Well, I mean, there's no easy answers there. I mean, I guess in a sense, you could sort of, if it was a patient, I would say, well, this is only going to be for a certain amount of time. And they are paying for your food, aren't they? It's like, yeah, they're paying for the heating and the lighting of the house. Yeah. Okay, so they may not get along as perfectly well with their parents, and they may feel judged. Now, don't forget, parents and offspring are sort of on opposite sides. Parents want to sort of teach their kids how to be people, and kids want to show that they're people they don't need to be taught anymore. So there's a kind of automatic, in a sense, issue of conflict there, a little bit. So, but of course, most people will accept that parents need to be parental at some level, and most parents will not be too pushy about their opinions about how the young person should live their life.
Right.
Probably also important to make space and to go for walks. If you have a car, go for a drive. Go for, if you're near a beach, if you're near an area that's open for walks, go for walks, and also to ask for the space you need. If you're in the kind of context where you could do that, where you have a good relationship with the other person, don't be afraid to say, I need some space.
And if it gets really bad, you have that car. If you have that car, you could leave and not come back. You could call your parents and say, well, I found another place to shelter. But I mean, hopefully it doesn't get to that point.
So the next one talks about staying present and practicing mindfulness. What does that really mean, and how could you employ that in these types of situations, Wanda?
Mindfulness is about bringing yourself into the present moment. Noticing that your mind has gone to the past or the future, and with self-compassion and kindness, bringing yourself back into the present moment. When we're worried about whether we'll still have a job by the time this is over, to be able to come back and say, but I do have a job today. Or, and I can't control tomorrow. So not denying the realities, but choosing not to dwell on them. And it's a discipline. One of the things that I love learning about meditation is that meditating well is not about having a mind that doesn't drift. It's about noticing that it's drifting and bringing yourself back to the focus you've chosen to give yourself. And so you actually have to drift away in order to come back to the present moment, and then be aware that you've drifted away and come back to the present moment. And it's actually that rhythm, which is the meditation, not the staying static in one spot the whole time, because our minds will drift and we will worry. But coming back to the present moment and simply, as it says here, observing and describing without evaluation or judgment. It's like, oh, right, there I am, worrying again. So now what am I going to bring myself back to instead? And the really important thing is that not being judgmental or self-critical.
Right.
Steve, can I say something?
Yeah, for sure.
So my training doesn't include mindfulness, and but it's more interpersonal, existential, psychodynamic kind of therapy. And I think mindfulness is excellent, although we don't have training in it. But we should balance between mindfulness and then the other side would be living in the past or thinking about the past and thinking about the future. So actually thinking about the future and planning for the future is also a very healthy thing. So this concept that only the present is really important is not actually logical or reasonable. So staying in the present at times and then thinking about the future. And of course, a lot of psychodynamic therapy is talking about the past to try to understand it. And that's also very helpful as well.
So the next point talks a little bit about thinking about how you would prefer to observe the holidays. Is this kind of discussing, rituals or ways that you can make the context that you're in better? And what kind of suggestions would you kind of have around that?
Not sure which one of us you're asking, but I'm going to jump in and answer.
Go ahead, Wanda. Sorry.
One of the things, as I read this, I thought, you know what? Some of us are longing to go back to the traditions that we are keenly missing. And if that's the case, I would say, and this thinking into the future and planning, here's a moment to derive a great deal of pleasure from planning how you're going to re-celebrate the events you missed in lockdown. So the time when you'll be able to get together with family and friends and re-celebrate Easter or re-celebrate your birthday if it got missed. And to really take joy in planning that. On the other hand, if you're someone who's discovered that actually it's a huge relief not to do that big dinner or plan that big party, and how lovely it was to have a smaller, more intimate, maybe just with your spouse or just with your spouse and your children. And this is an opportunity to say, you know what, I'm not going back to the way things were. I've made a delightful discovery and I'm going to hang on to this. And I'm going to give myself permission to stick with this new discovery going forward.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think I'm going to flip to a poll for our audience that are kind of related to some of these issues, and that might help us, address some of the kind of common themes that are being experienced. So this is for everybody to kind of participate with us. Feel free. These are anonymous, so we won't know who said what, but I'm just going to throw out the poll now. All right, we'll give a few more seconds for people to fill this out. All right. I'm just going to end it now. 5 seconds. All right. All right. Does everybody see the results? So the biggest sacrifice in our group here tonight, not being able to meet with friends and family and not being able to attend church as number 2. Everybody likes to cook, apparently. So, and then which have you enjoyed the most during this quarantine time? And hobbies. There's a big winner there, and no commute as well. I was talking to someone today, and I was saying like everyone's garden's going to be the best ever this year. Just everybody I've talked to has talked about like they're just in their garden all the time. So I'm expecting some pretty nice outdoor spaces. What are some of the things that you feel like from that poll, Michael, that kind of jump out at you, or was it as you expected?
Let me see. I mean, I think the first one is as expected, not being able to meet with friends and family. And of course, even when we do by Zoom, it's not the same thing. So that's not much of a surprise. And then of course, let's see the other thing. I didn't know people had so many hobbies. I think my hobby is work, so I don't really have hobbies. And I do play golf, but it doesn't really count because my friends don't. They say, "Well, you don't really play golf," so they're not that supportive, and I can't blame them because I'm pretty bad.
How about you, Wanda? Was that as expected, or were there any surprises there?
I'm not surprised, but I find it interesting that people have been feeling that not being able to attend in-person church gatherings has been a sacrifice. That looks like the possibility of discovering something important that people will need to hang on to and to really celebrate when they can go back to being in church, to savor the restoration of something that has been importantly lost during this time. Mm-hmm. And so, and you put it up against, it's also been enjoyable to have online church. And a number of people have found that the most enjoyable thing. And when I put that together, I think there's a significant percentage of people for whom their faith community and their faith life has been important during this time. And so the opportunity to, if there's been space made in your life because you haven't been able to work or you haven't had a commute, there's the potential there to invest some time and energy in spiritual things so that they can nurture and sustain us.
Yeah. I'm just going to pop back to our little sheet here. Oops. Here we go. Oh. As my colleagues know, I have challenges in screen sharing. Okay, here we go. Remember that it's okay to take a time out. I know last time we discussed this a little bit, Wanda, where you can take a time out even in a room full of people. Have you been finding that more of a challenge, or is it still a good practice to maintain?
Right. Well, I'm in the unique situation, Steve, where our children are grown and living in their own homes. And so I'm in a 4-bedroom house with my husband and I. We have plenty of room. In fact, what I find now is looking forward to lunch and coffee breaks where I can go find him and bug him and say, surely you don't have to work right now. Let's have a cup of coffee, or, you want to go for a walk. So clearly I'm not suffering from the lack of time alone. and not in any sense. What's nice is having time to go for walks and get some moderate exercise and feel like I'm actually taking better care of myself. That's I like to think that that's where my commute time has gone, in taking those walks, preferably with my husband, but even on my own, and making sure that I'm keeping myself in good health.
How about you, Michael?
Well, and we talked about this last time. I think both Wanda and myself are introverts. And a good definition of an introvert is somebody who recharges their batteries when they spend some time alone. And so that it's not necessarily they don't want to get together with people, that's for sure, but that the energy of being alone and is building up energy that they can use for when they're with other people. I think that's a very important thing. And because you might think that if you're just sheltering at home with a few other people, that would be an introverted situation, but it may not be. Actually, for somebody who's quite introverted, they may need their alone time, even in that kind of limited social interaction.
Right. The next one talks a little bit about knowing and honoring your limits as best you can. Michael, what do you think they mean by that, and how does that kind of apply to this context?
Well, Wanda said something last time. I thought it was really good, and she talked about us being humbled and worried as well as therapists. And we're not super people. We're just people. We may have some sort of expertise in psychology and psychotherapy, but we're just people. And in fact, I say I'm a professional psychotherapist, but I'm an amateur human being. So in terms of being a professional, we also want to recognize the limits of our expertise. And so it's a huge field of many different kinds of therapies. They say there's 800, 1,000 kinds of psychotherapy, and there's couples therapy, and there's group therapy, and there's family therapy. And we have to know our limits if we want to do good work and also stay out of trouble with our regulatory body. So we don't have to know everything, and we don't have to do everything. And so I think that is true for professionals, but I think it's true for everybody. You don't have to do everything. That's important to know that.
I have a concept that I've started talking about, which I find delight in the paradox of the statement: boundaried generosity. Generosity that's got edges.
Yeah.
And inside those boundaries, we are free to give generously and without reservation. But when we make a mistake of stepping over the boundaries of what we're able to give, we are no longer generous. Mm-hmm. And it has occurred to me that resentment is a very useful emotion in this regard, because when I start to feel resentful about how much I'm giving, I've stepped over the limits. I'm outside the boundaries of what I can give freely and without reservation. Yeah. And I need to back it up and get back inside a space where there are edges to my generosity, and I know that I'm giving freely and without reservation.
And I guess this would be kind of related to both your guys' work on professional burnout in some ways, right? Like in the same way, it's almost like you're burning out in your interpersonal relationships as well. And like there's also a question of like sustainability too of this whole situation. Like what if this goes on for another 6 months or a year? How can we sustain that? And maybe the only way is to have these types of personal limits and knowing them, right? Maybe that's part of the mindfulness piece too, is knowing and being aware of what is actually happening with yourself and around you.
Right, Steve. And go ahead.
No, that's fine.
Okay, so Steve, I agree. And I think one of the things is they call it the new normal. Unfortunately, I call it the new abnormal. Unfortunately, that's what it is. And although as time goes on, we will adapt. Human beings are the most adapting of all animals by far. And we have to give ourselves time. We have to forgive ourselves. We have to forgive others. And I'm not saying that it will be optimal, that's for sure. But we can adapt, at least to some extent.
And I think most of us are aware that we don't know what the eventual normal will look like, but we know it's not going to be the same as it was before the pandemic. There simple things like being prepared to teach a hybrid model, because there are people who won't be comfortable coming back into the classroom. They are either at risk themselves because of health reasons, or they take care of someone who's vulnerable. And knowing that, what it means to teach and to learn has got to change. And then it's what Michael said. I mean, can we imagine ourselves adapting and finding our way through that and coming to terms with, yes, it has to be different. Because I can't actually imagine how long it will take and whether it will ever be the case that things are the way they used to be.
One of the participants asked a question that kind of deals with hobbies and patterns, and also some of the themes of, being that super person. So they ask, I was able to read the Bible and pray daily before the crisis, but now it's a struggle and I don't know why. How would you, talk to somebody that is experiencing like, I can't do the things I was doing before, and I feel maybe guilt or maybe some demotivation because of that. Wanda, how would you kind of, start, to, navigate this?
It's interesting because just earlier this week, our small group was talking about prayer and how, we are a group of people who are young seniors, probably would be the demographic we would fall into. And we were talking about how we can't pray all the time the way we used to when we were younger. And the freedom that comes from giving ourselves permission to experiment with new forms and saying, what, there's probably more than one way to be in relationship with God. And if the same old isn't working, maybe it's time to change it up and try something different. And it's also, I would say, a time when it's important to remember that the body of Christ is there for each other. And if I can't pray, maybe you can pray for me. Maybe the community that I'm part of would pray for me, and maybe it's okay with God if my friends and family are praying when I can't. I suspect that it is okay, even though it's not comfortable and it's not what we want.
Well, and part of it is these expectations that we're placing on ourselves, right? From ourselves, or even externally, from our culture or from our upbringing and all these things, right? It's all kind of, we have a lot of time to think about stuff too, right?
But that's number 9 here, Steve, and it says meditate, pray, journal, or engage in another practice that allows you to slow down. Well, right. For some of us, there's been space made in our lives. Of course, not for all of us. Some people, it's business as usual, depending on, especially if you're a healthcare practitioner, that things may not have slowed down. But even saying, I'm going to take the time I used to spend commuting, or I used to spend shopping, and I'm going to give myself that time as an opportunity to reflect and to experiment and to take a playful attitude and try new things and see how it goes. I mean, if it doesn't work, okay, well, you're no farther behind than before you tried it. And maybe in the process, you'll discover something that is really quite delightful.
Michael, do you want to add something?
Well, sure. Thanks, Wanda. I can tell you're a good therapist because you're saying trying, if you're not able to pray as much as you usually do, you can do something else. And I can read about science and faith and that area of apologetics much easier than I can do a lot of praying. And so I do feel, and I go, I think God likes this. I mean, it's God's world I'm reading about, and I used to be an atheist who believed that science had proven God doesn't exist. Yeah, yes, I know I was sort of foolish to say the least, but I like your concept that that could be totally reasonable and it might be more doable. Now, the other thing I was thinking about the person who mentioned that is the whole concept of if somebody's very stressed out, if they're stressed out to the extent that they're sick, they may not be able to function in many different ways. And in medicine, we often call that the sick role, not in the sense of somebody having a bad attitude and taking a role of being a sickie, but actually if they literally are sick. And so it does take time to get back to health. And if somebody isn't able to function when they're sick, the best thing is to be able to forgive themselves and get the help they need, either help from a therapist or help from family and friends. Now, obviously, that's much more difficult now.
Michael, that puts me in mind of something that I have found myself talking to people in the wake of burnout is that's a form of illness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite a costly one.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to convalesce. Mm-hmm. Our culture has lost touch with that concept. Mm-hmm. That convalescing means that you take time, maybe more time than you'd like to rest and recover and gradually rebuild strength and energy to resume the activities you used to do. And it's interesting because physically, if someone broke their leg, we wouldn't be saying to them, just get up and do it. Just, go out and jog. We'd be saying, whoa, wait, just rest. Mm-hmm. And give your body a chance to heal. Mm-hmm. And then gradually work your way back up to going out for a jog. Mm-hmm. And we'd actually be quite alarmed mm-hmm. if we thought somebody was just going to jump right back into it. But psychologically, we mm-hmm. forget that it works very similarly.
Right.
Great comment.
So the next set of questions are kind of tied together a little bit. So one participant asked about, we've talked a little bit about living and dealing with interpersonal issues, but what about those people that are all alone without anybody with them and have maybe lost touch with people? And another person along those lines just said, how can they continue to concern people who have kept themselves isolated and motivate them after the pandemic? Yeah, because I can imagine there's a lot of people out there that are just experience a lot of loneliness right now, and maybe depression because of it, lack of motivation, all those kinds of things. How would you kind of counsel that person and counsel those people that are friends with people that have been isolated for a long time? Wanda, why don't you start us off?
It's an important question, and I find myself wanting to give a very cautious answer because it's impossible to answer this question in a one-size-fits-all. And anything I say can sound either condescending or impossible to a given individual who might be struggling with this. So please take what I say as an idea, not a prescription, or yeah, not a prescription. I'm not saying this is what everybody should do. But I'm gonna take a risk and say sometimes it's about finding someone else who's lonely and reaching out. So taking a risk and reconnecting with somebody that you haven't talked to for a long time, but who you might really enjoy reconnecting with. And there's quite a number of people and comments on the internet and around that, yeah, that's what a lot of people are doing. And it's actually quite a lot of fun, because there was a point in time when you had overlapping interests with that person, or maybe shared work with that person, and finding out what they've been doing could be really interesting. Finding someone who's lonely, as in asking your parish priest or your ministers, are there people in the congregation who are living alone where I could check in with them on Zoom or by phone and see if there's anything I can do to help them. Being able to help another person really builds our sense of worth. It's like it matters that I get up in the morning because this person, I can go pick up some groceries for this person, even if I'm just leaving it on their front step and talking to them through their screen door. I know I've done something that matters today. If I can call them and spend some time on the phone, and they sound more cheerful by the end of that conversation, I know it matters that I got up and did something. That isn't going to solve the problem of loneliness, but it might alleviate it for long enough to give us the energy then to find the next solution to our loneliness.
There's that famous book about the 5 love languages, right? One of them was physical touch. Like, what is somebody to do that just, is alone and that's their love language, must be very difficult to be isolated like that.
I know that I was speaking with somebody, and I never speak about clients, by the way, so this is just a friend, an acquaintance, who said that she's aware that she's chatting with the grocery store clerks way more than she would have before COVID-19. But she lives alone, and here's a person, a real person. And it strikes me that the grocery checkout clerk is probably happy to be seen and spoken to with enjoyment, that both people might really enjoy those moments of connection. And it doesn't have to be a big serious conversation. It's more like, I see you and I'm glad to see you. I'm glad you're getting your groceries. I'm glad you're here to check my groceries through. For a moment now, I'm not alone.
How are you, Michael? How would you speak into this?
Well, I love how Wanda's talking about it. I mean, in some of my training, the one of the central concepts is that human beings are social animals, and so we have our meaning in that. We have a social need, and not only do we need to have that, we also have a need to give it, and it's mutual. So I think that's a very important part of that whole thing. Any way you can. So you may have to take a chance, though. You might have to call a friend you haven't talked to for a while, or try to get out your comfort zone. You're not comfortable, but you may be shy and not want to try these different things. I would suggest you give yourself a chance to try them. You might find them helpful. Now, one of the other things, in a totally different way, is when I was an atheist, definitely when I was alone. But as a believer in Jesus Christ and God the Father, I'm never alone. I always have God, and of course that's obvious for any Christians. But I think that can be a very important thing to draw on as strength. And of course, in the history of the Christian tradition, some of the saints wanted to get away from all people so they could concentrate on God. And so here I'm not saying we want to do that. We're not saints, but we have an opportunity to maybe have a deeper connection with God because of the fact that we are under lockdown.
Now, it's funny that you say that. I was one of our adjunct professors here, Sister Connie, who's a nun, and I asked her how it was going up there where they were at, and she's like, "It's so quiet around here," and I was like, "Kind of like a monastery," and she laughed. Yeah, very much so.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't have to go to the desert to do it. We can just do it in downtown Toronto.
Yeah.
I think it's important, though, to notice that it can be very, very frightening. Michael, when we lose our sense of God being here. And so it's also important to acknowledge that there can be dark nights of the soul.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that God is not there, but it's frighteningly real that we can't sense.
Right.
And can't connect. And those are very tough times. So if people are experiencing that in the midst of the pandemic and the social distancing, that's a really hard place to be. Mm-hmm. And that would be when we need to reach out to our faith community and ask for prayer and ask for support, because there will be a significant subset of people for whom that is the experience right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask a little bit, some more serious questions in a poll. I'm going to launch another poll.
Able to spend time listening and...
Oh, I think Wanda is... This is the other reality of COVID, is in Zoom calls when people's internet starts to act up. Is everybody there? Oh, yep. Wanda, you're back?
I'm back.
Okay, try again. We missed the last little bit of what you said.
I don't know how much you missed. So at the risk of repeating myself, I was just thinking that this is a time when our communities of faith are really important. Mm-hmm. And it's a time when, if we're lonely, but we are also very aware of the presence of God in our lives, that's a time to reach out and find the people who are lonely and frightened because they can't sense the presence of God.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot of people that are probably experiencing some pretty life-altering things. Maybe a family member has, contracted COVID, or they've lost their job, or something along those lines. And sometimes it's hard to see God in the midst of suffering and challenges such as that. So yeah, we don't want to minimize that. Those are very real things that people are experiencing in this time. Yeah. So I'm going to just launch a poll. These questions kind of are a little bit more serious. They deal around mental health. And again, it's anonymous, so feel free to answer it. I'll just give you a few minutes to answer these questions.
I like the question about how people are coping with stress and anxiety.
Yeah, I started going for long walks, and I never really did that before. I find it inefficient, but that's been really helpful. And I've been going for hour-plus walks at night, late in the dark. It's been very relaxing for me. I'm a pretty busy person, so I think doing nothing's probably healthy for me on many levels.
I'm intrigued by your comment that going for a walk is inefficient. But you mean it's not serving a purpose?
Yeah, I feel like if I'm going to exercise, I get better value out of playing squash for half an hour than walking for 2 hours. And so,
I see what you mean. It's physically inefficient.
yes.
Uh-huh.
And time inefficient too. It's a big chunk of time. But yeah, I haven't fully embraced it, but I like it. But there's something inside of me that's struggling with the walk.
Well, I find aimless walks, unless I have company, to be somewhat difficult. But what I've discovered is that I can walk on my treadmill at my treadmill desk, and I can read with better focus than if I sit in a chair and try to read something that's a heavy academic article or book.
Yeah.
And I feel quite virtuous because I'm getting work done and I'm getting exercise.
You're helping the brain and the body.
That's right. And interestingly enough, I'm better focused because I'm moving. I think because I'm oxygenating my brain and I'm integrating left and right brain functioning, and I come away from doing that and I actually feel like I'm retaining more of what I'm reading and having more interesting thoughts about the applications or the right.
I'm going to have to try that. Thank you, Wanda. I'll let you know.
I sit down in a nice comfy chair to read an academic journal. I have the custom of calling them natural sedatives. Before I know it, I'm sleeping. And it's like, I'm not going to absorb that knowledge that way.
Yeah.
I hope that wasn't Steve's paper that you read.
It's been some of my own. Sorry.
That's humble.
So I'm just going to end the poll here and we can discuss it. So as you can see, a lot of people experiencing changes in sleep, changes in eating patterns, irritability, fatigue, alcohol use. 23% have said they've been coping well. It's pretty low. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So people are trying to do different things to cope. Which of the following signs of burnouts have you regularly experienced during quarantine?
Actually, before you go there, I want to pick up on the 16% who've been to counseling.
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised by how low that number is, because I have never been busier in my private practice. Now mine is part-time because I'm also a faculty person most of the time, but I have been surprised by the number of people who have resumed therapy or started therapy for the first time. What, I mean, it does, I see a question here about how can you afford counseling if you don't have a job? Obviously, the people who are coming to see me either have health benefits or they can afford counseling. But some of us will also be being flexible with our fees because we're aware of the need and aware that people do have to live with constraints right now.
Well, and also wonder that we physicians can offer psychotherapy
Right.
Without having to charge the patient. Now the taxes are paying for it.
Yeah.
So if anybody on the webinar is interested, they should talk to their family doctor, because there are doctors who can provide psychotherapy. We don't call it counseling generally. And so Katie from the States is saying that not in the United States, and that's correct. Here we have universal health, and it may not be perfect. Nothing's perfect. Well, God is perfect, but other than that, nothing's perfect. But we do have a psychotherapy available here in Ontario. And if you ask your family doctor, virtually, of course, they could refer you on almost certainly. So that's important. Now, I noticed this list here of signs of burnout, and it's very interesting because the number one symptom is isolation or disconnection from others. But we have to reinterpret that under the circumstances. In irregular burnout, that would be an important factor. In COVID-19, that's your civic duty. So you have to see it in a different way, and that goes back to my concept that that we have to reinterpret what we're supposed to be doing. One of the things I've said is that we're being asked to be citizen soldiers, and we're fighting a war against a virus, and we're citizen soldiers. All of us are, and as citizen soldiers, we have a responsibility. But the responsibility is very different than a soldier in the field, where they can get shot, they could get blown up. We could get bored, we could get lonely, we could get depressed. I mean, that's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but it may be somewhat better than being a soldier in the field. We can watch movies. They have to duck because the bullets are coming. We can sleep in. They can't sleep at all because they're under fire. And so I'm not, we joke. Wanda and myself joke, but sometimes this stuff is really serious, and we are being called to be soldiers, and this is important. And we know, because we know that some people aren't doing that, and we're getting upset, and we're looking at TV in terms of people. I'm not talking about the protesters, that's a different thing. I'm talking about people going to the beach and foolishly doing that, and that could raise their risks, of course, of COVID-19 and our risks. So if you're feeling really isolated and disconnected, well, part of that is thank you. Thank you, you're doing what you're supposed to do at some level. But Wanda and myself and Steve we've all said, try to connect in any other possible way you can. But you are supposed to be isolated. That's the point.
The nice thing with the good weather is that there is some possibility of keeping physical distance, but actually being in vicinity of one another.
Yeah.
So that, as long as you are 6 or more feet apart, you could actually sit in someone's backyard. And as long as neither of you are deaf, you can, I'm saying that because I actually have to put my hearing aids in if I'm going to sit that far from other people. But, provided that you've got the right supports, it is possible now to begin to get together with 1 or 2 other people, as long as you are taking reasonable precautions.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
And the other thing with your example of being soldiers is that we do have an enemy, and it's a stealthy, hard to identify, hard to fight off. And so some of the feelings that a person in military service would be experiencing are not inappropriate for us to compare ourselves to. And the kind of persistent concern, the persistent wariness, and being on high alert is probably, we are getting some of that experience as we try to cope with keeping things safe for ourselves and other people in regard to the virus.
Well, I think you're totally right, Wanda. I saw this movie several months ago, The Invisible Man. I think it's the 5th time or 6th time they've remade the movie. I read the novel many years ago. And here's this man, and he's invisible, and he's dangerous, but he's one man. We have all these billions, hundreds of billions of viruses that are invisible. And so no wonder we're scared, because they're very dangerous. One man is dangerous, but basically invisible virus is even more dangerous.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I'm going to pop back to our little page, our strategies for coping. We'll see if I can do it a little bit smoother this time. All right. I think that was pretty good.
That was good. That was good.
I'm getting adept at it. So number 10 talks about attending a religious, spiritual, or community service. With the online church, one of the participants commented that they're having fun exploring other people's churches, their friends' churches. What are some suggestions around this? I know we talked a little bit about experimenting with maybe some different spiritual disciplines that you're used to, but is this an opportunity to, look at some other religious traditions, maybe online, because everybody's kind of putting their services online for people to experience? Or how can you connect with it? One of the things that I saw recently, which was interesting, was when the lockdown first started, there was a huge jump in religious service attendance online, as expected. And actually some churches were seeing a boom in people connecting to their services. But I saw a survey from Barna Group maybe last week, which said that people who regularly attended service before the lockdown have now 48% of them haven't attended an online service in over a month. Wow. So there was an initial spike, but now it seems that people are getting fatigued of attending religious service online. I know this isn't your guys' expertise, but maybe you have some wisdom to share a little bit. Michael, do you want to kind of talk a little bit about the opportunities, challenges around that?
Well, Steve, I guess this is where I recognize the limitations of my knowledge. I mean, I am attending, but I find it not nearly as engaging, but I have attended weekly. There may have been one week I didn't. So I think obviously it's a whole area that churches will have to start to figure out what is impacting their congregations and increase somehow that. I'm involved, but I'm going to sort of switch the question a little bit, because I think I mentioned I was taking a theology course, and it had to switch to online, and I find online learning at that level actually just as good or better. I mean, this is the irony, is that there's more opportunity to talk and interchange ideas and so on. In class, hardly ever does somebody put up their hand, and there's a little bit of discussion, but online you get to prepare your answers, and you can really get deep. And so there, it's like it deepened the experience, and that really helped me. And that's not the first time I've noticed that. Even pre-COVID, I noticed that.
One of the things I would want to know, Steve, is how often people have been attending church services before COVID-19. Because I think you'll find that there is an increase in the infrequency with which people actually go to church. That I know that in some denominations or some centers, it's becoming the tradition to go to church once a month or to go to church twice a month. And I would want to know whether the spike and the drop, how it compared to regular church attendance before I would get alarmed about it. Mm-hmm. It might be that it's worthy of alarm, but it might be a resetting back to closer to what it was like when people were actually going to church in person. I don't know, right? But the social scientist in me says, well, what are we comparing it to? Before we decide whether this is a troublesome thing or not. I also think that it has a great deal to do with how connected into our faith community we are. Because if you're part of if a person's part of a small group, and that small group is still meeting regularly,
Yep.
A lot of the sense of being the body of Christ is going to come from that small group, and maybe always has, rather than being someone who's sitting in church on Sunday.
Right.
And if people have increased the frequency with which they are experimenting with new forms of prayer or new spiritual disciplines because they've had time to do it, that may have taken the place of going to church on Sunday. And we might ideally wish that both were happening, but it would be really interesting to talk to individuals and say, so what has your spiritual life? You know, you had the poll questions of, you know, what are you doing different and what are you experiencing differently? It would be really interesting to put up a poll in terms of where are you getting most of your spiritual nourishment from? Are you reading more? Are you experimenting with prayer more? Are you journaling more? Are you meditating more? Are you trying out different people's churches just to see, wow, this is cool. I don't have to leave home and I can check out lots of different ways, lots of different kinds of worship services, all of which might have a really positive yield that isn't going to be reflected in how many people are watching services online.
Right. I think we can probably get that poll together before the end of this webinar. So we'll work on that in the background while we're talking. Yeah, someone mentioned in the questions section that they've been actively sending cards to everybody in their church directory. And I know my dad's a pastor, and every Sunday they've been calling through the entire church. They're a small church, so they can do it, but they've been calling through the entire church directory and just giving a phone call to everybody. So I think there's some good things that are coming out of this, because I don't know what your guys' church experience is, but I usually talk to the same people at church, and I don't linger a long time, and I kind of go and leave. And so this is affording some level of more interconnectivity in a weird way through the isolation. So I think there's those opportunities to kind of build that a little bit.
Well, Steve, I want to give you some, let me see, congratulations or validation, because I think what you're doing here is a great kind of thing, which maybe churches should do more, which is have a topic and have interactions, and people get to say and give some feedback and ask questions and so on. So I think that you've done a great thing here, and maybe this should be a model that churches adopt. Sorry, Wanda.
I'm just captured by the idea of what you're saying. I've totally forgotten what I was going to say. But I do think that the more opportunities we have to interact, the better the quality of our experience will be through a time like this. And there are some churches that are doing virtual coffee hours after their virtual service. That in-person coffee hours don't work particularly well for me. So virtual ones would be, yeah, that wouldn't work for me, but it will work for some people. And for a church community to experiment and give themselves, I know I keep saying this, but one thing COVID-19 has done for us is give us permission to experiment, to try new things. And I'm noticing a theme through what we're talking about tonight, and it's picking up on something we talked about last time, Michael, that the loss of control and the loss of choice. And what we're talking about tonight is, how do you put choice back into your life? And giving ourselves permission to try new things is a way of putting choice back in the face of not being able to have things the way we like them.
Mhm. You know, I mean, I like your reminding me that there's a virtual coffee shop. I might check that out to see if my church has it. But the coffee is terrible, but that's because it's my coffee, actually. Sorry, it's terrible.
Yeah, and I think I was on a webinar a week and a half ago, and the guy really said, like things aren't the same as they were, for churches, but what are the opportunities? What kind of opportunities has God given us now that we didn't have before? And I think in the same with our own personal lives and in our relationships, there might be new opportunities that we can explore.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. I feel better already.
And that kind of goes into our next number 11 here, where it talks about allow yourself to feel uncomfortable. That kind of goes along the lines of trying new things and being vulnerable in new areas. Yeah, maybe we don't have to belabor that one any further.
I think that's good advice, whether we're talking about navigating the holiday season, navigating COVID-19, or just plain navigating life. It's kind of perennially good advice.
I agree. And I think that, they say life is difficult. That's an understatement.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So checking in via phone, text, Facebook, email with someone who helps you remember who you are and what matters to you now. Yeah. How would this kind of apply to this context? I feel like I've been reconnecting with friends from university 20 years ago that I just have been too busy, to really reconnect with. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the part that matters about this statement is that it be someone who helps you remember who you are and what matters to you. And so even if you're reconnecting with someone you haven't seen for 20 years, the conversation is about who you are now and what matters to you now. And so I think it's the having an authentic conversation that goes beyond the surface that matters, where we feel like we have connected with someone in meaningful ways. And I think that part of our COVID experience is that we've cut through some of the social niceties, because I'm not going to get on Zoom and talk about the weather. If I'm going to reach out to somebody, I'm being intentional. I'm sending them an email and saying, I've been thinking about you and I'd love to connect. Is it possible to have a Zoom conversation or meet for a virtual coffee? And already we're signaling, let's have a real conversation about things that matter, which is it's hard to do otherwise in times like these.
Great. So I'm just gonna we've got our poll ready. So we might have missed a few things on your list, Wanda, but I'll launch it now for where we're finding spiritual nourishment. Thank you for the Wycliffe staff, Caitlin, for putting that together. There's people behind the scenes that help make these things awesome. And thanks for.
I thought you were just doing it by magic, Steve.
Yeah.
Or multitasking and writing a poll while you're hosting a show.
Yeah.
Well, he is a magician.
Yeah.
Well, he's a magician. We can tell because he's in two places at once. So right below me here is Steve Hugo, and you're over there too.
Yeah. I have two computers going right now. So one's managing polls and the other one's talking.
So there's a logical explanation. Okay, I feel better now.
Yeah. not
I'm not really into magic myself.
I'm not dissociating my personality or anything like that. So
Yeah. And if we have patients with multiple personality, we're not allowed to bill for more than one person.
oh.
In fact, actually, because there's an interlude here, the government is only paying me if I see 10 patients. Guess how many patients they're paying me for? One. Yeah, one patient.
So group.
If you're seeing it in a group, if you're seeing them in a group.
Yeah. So does that sound fair?
No.
No, it doesn't sound fair. I mean, it's absurd. So, sometimes fairness is hard to really determine, but this is not fair. I'm seeing 10 people and I get to bill for one. So we might start a petition. I might send it out to you. So
that can be one of our polls.
Yeah, okay. It's a privilege to be a therapist and to provide help, but still, yeah.
All right, so I'm going to end the poll here. Okay, so sharing results.
That's pretty neat. There's lots of stuff. There's lots of activity.
I'm impressed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So about a quarter all the way down on number 2. So
yeah.
Some people are doing more, some people about the same, and then some people have shifted, and then a quarter are doing less.
So that puts a different cast on the spike and drop in virtual church services.
Yeah.
So one of the things I would have added to this poll, just to put it out there for people, not to be critical of your poll, because I think it's fantastic that you pulled it together so quickly. But one of the things our small group was talking about this week was realizing that some of the ways in which we've been praying, we haven't been calling prayer. That going for walks and telling our grandchildren about the amazing things about creation stirs in us a sense of awe about the greatness of God, but we haven't been calling that prayer, even though it's a very prayerful activity. When we've been being creative with our hobbies and even in our garden, and it has stirred in us a sense of gratitude and thankfulness or delight in the diversity of life. That is also a form of prayer, provided that we don't limit prayer to the words we say to God or the words we hear from God. It has more to do, I think, with an attitude and a shift within ourselves in terms of our orientation. Is it towards God or not? And I think probably some of the things that people are doing here in terms of informally through conversations with friends and family, they might not have called it prayer, but if there's a sense of being drawn into relationship with God and other people, I'd be willing to call that prayer myself.
Thank you, Wanda. I feel much better because I've been studying theology and had so many hours of studying and stuff, and I feel connected with God.
Yeah.
But it isn't prayer in the usual sense. But thank you. I was hoping what you were saying was the case. I was thinking along those lines too, but you're validating my hope.
I think it has all to do with the orientation it draws us into, in terms of an attitude and for me it's that does it bring me into a place of gratitude and awareness of the wonder of God.
Nice, very nice.
Some of the participants have been asking questions along the lines of vocation and jobs. and also with mental health. So some of the challenges people are expressing are, in this time, I've started to realize that I maybe am in the wrong job, or maybe I can't be in the job that I want to because of the current financial climate that there is, or because of my mental health state. How would you advise somebody? I know, again, we have to put a disclaimer on that each situation is unique, and there's not a one size fits all answer. But for those people that are struggling with what they're called to do, what they feel like they should be doing, their vocation, and the inability to actualize that in this context, either because of mental health challenges or because of just the way that the society is now, with nobody hiring or no job prospects open to them.
Being at the risk of being trite, change is hard. Change is deeply hard. And when we are confronting the possibility of something like, I'm in the wrong, this career is not going to sustain me, it's not going to, that it provides for me financially is not enough. I'm starting to think that I need something else. That's a painful process to go through. And I can talk about times when I've gone through a process like that, but I'm speaking about it with hindsight. And I can see where God was at work, and I can see the good that has come from it. But living it forward, we have to live it without knowing the outcome. And that's much, much harder. So it's very difficult to say to someone else, it'll be okay. Because first of all, I don't know that that's true. And second of all, it doesn't help when you're living it forward. What I've always been struck by the fact that we read scripture in retrospect. We know the end of the story, and it changes how we understand the story when we know before we start reading it that it's going to be okay. But I've often wondered what it would be like to be the person in the scriptural story and to have to live it forward without knowing whether it's going to be okay or not. And so I want to say it's going to be okay. Change is uncomfortable and painful and difficult, but I don't think that's helpful. I think it's more helpful to say, oh man, it is really hard living things forward.
How about you, Michael? How would you add to that wisdom?
Well, I've thought about this a lot. I don't know if you know, I'm sure you do, that Maclean's magazine every couple of years, I think, or maybe every year, has an issue, or used to have an issue of the universities. They rate the universities and which is the best university, and they do a very good job of it in terms of recognizing this as a range of different kinds of universities and so on and so forth. So it would depend on many factors. But, so in a sense, though, it's sort of similar to, what's the right job for you or me? And of course, there is some element of the job, but there's often an element of who we are. And so when it comes to universities, I would say it's not so much the university. Obviously there's different universities, but most of it is the student. Somebody could be in a so-called half-decent university and be a very good student. And somebody could be at a prestigious university like Harvard or Cambridge, or Oxford, and just be, partying and drinking and getting drunk and skipping classes and not. So the concept is, we all will, reality being what it is, most of us will say, this job is not quite what I was hoping. But that's reality, because life is never what we hoped in an absolute sense, no matter what the job is. So I think it's probably better to be the better worker in the job. And many jobs, all jobs maybe, have an element of, I think, because I believe in God, honor. So somebody could be a good whatever, and that's more important than the job itself. Now, I'm not saying it's as simple as that, but all jobs, accountants, let's say, teachers, therapists, physicists, chemists, it's a limitation to what you can do as the job. You will find that limitation, and that's where we need to seek other important people, social connection. We have to seek God. That's what I would say.
Yeah, one of the interesting things, I've done a lot of work in. Are you still there?
Yeah,
I've done a lot of
I'm
work.
here.
Sorry, I thought you had zoned out on
Yeah.
on interspace there, but I've done a lot of work in West Africa, and one of my cultural learnings, which I found very interesting, and I come back to often, is in North America we all show up at a dinner party.
Yeah.
Question one is, what's your name?
Yeah.
Question two is, what do you do?
Right.
And what was interesting in Africa is, in the place I worked in Africa, I can't generalize the whole thing,
Yeah.
what's more important there is, like, what village do you come from?
Right.
Where do you come from?
Right.
And who's your family members? Who are you connected with in a social way? And what you do as a job is so low on the list of what makes your identity.
Right.
It's just not a part of that. So I think a piece of this question in the North American context is somehow what we do has become who we are,
right,
in maybe an unhealthy way.
Yeah.
So some of these challenges stem from that, because we find our identity in the things that we do. And I guess the Christian message is that we can find our identity in Christ, and we are, loved unconditionally in that relationship. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but that's just something I've noticed, in going back and forth, where it's just like, oh, I'm in such a different way of orienting myself to what I do,
Wanda, you have some concepts.
Well, I actually just, I was listening to you guys, I pulled up a pair of slides that I use in some of my workshops about self-care and resilience. And I wondered if I could share that slide.
Go ahead and share it.
I'm going to make you look good at how to share the screen. All right. Hopefully people can see that.
Coming.
Okay. So, whoops. These are often when we're debating over, do I belong somewhere? Am I doing the right thing? How's this going for me? We only give ourselves two alternatives: success and failure. And of course, if you aren't completely succeeding, you're at risk of failing. So one of the things that we need to do is give ourselves a lot more options. And we do that by separating effort and outcome. And this is what it can look like. Success could be realizing that the outcome is more than I had asked or imagined. I've in fact made a step in the right direction, but now need to wait a bit before proceeding to the next step. I've achieved the outcome I thought I wanted, but I'm disappointed with it. So I'll have to rethink what I want as I move forward from here. This is the wrong time to pursue this goal, and it would be both better and okay to wait for a more opportune time. I have not adequately prepared and must attend to the gaps in my knowledge or skill before I resume my pursuit of this goal. The other person is not ready to meet me in the middle, and I need to accept and seek to understand this rather than to continue to batter away at their resistance or opposition. or the outcome I desired is not now, nor will it ever be within reach for me, and I must accept that. It would be better to grieve for a time and find a way to live with this reality with some measure of grace and peace. Then I'll be able to turn my energy and enthusiasm toward a new goal. And when we've got all of these options for success or progress towards success, it's not as frightening to be uncomfortable and to be in a liminal space between where we are now and where we would like to be as soon as possible.
Wow, that's amazing. I agree with Richard, who just said that's wonderful. Thank you very much, Wanda. Can I get that slide? That's wonderful. That's a fantastic concept. Beautiful.
I'm happy to share it.
Wonderful. Can you be my therapist? You know,
She's not covered by OHIP though, so
that's okay.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Let's talk. We need to. That's a beautiful slide. I mean, I mean, it's such a great concept, because what you're saying is this concept of success is not just one, either success or failure, black and white, yes or no, but it's a whole level of things. It seems to me that is so important in life, because if you thought it would be yes and no, it would be easy to give up.
Yeah. And it riffs off of what you said, Steve, because I am not what I do. There's so much more to each one of us than where we work
either.
That's right. That's right. And I mean, of course, we can get all cliched and say it's the journey, not the destination. I'm tired of those cliches, but I mean, the theme of the evening is choice and a generosity of space and room to experiment. And that is our.
And it's okay to fail, and it's okay to not meet expectations, right?
And not succeeding doesn't always mean that you've failed. It means you're somewhere in the process and you haven't, and the outcome is going to look different than you thought it would, but not necessarily failure.
So Wanda, you've inspired me. Do you mind if I share one slide?
I'd be happy that
making my job easy. You guys just
it's show and tell time.
Okay, here it is, show and tell. Let's see it. Okay, so it's not so different a concept that you were showing, not quite as sophisticated, but this concept is that when we succeed, we could look at it as the triumphant, what I call the triumphant concept of success is winning, versus a more modest concept of success is coping. Well, most of us are trying to cope. We're not winning, that's for sure. And if you look at this list, if you look down the triumphant list and you think of President Trump, then you're probably right. Yeah, that sounds like him. But on the other side, on the modest concept, is we're competent, maybe. We're trying to be, and sometimes we're not. We're learning a new skill. We're able to learn. We're all right. We're getting there. We're adequate plus, maybe good enough. Always adapting, healthy, interdependent, not independent, and servant leader. And we're not the master. And so I think this is a sort of similar concept that you were pointing on. Now it's a little bit less sophisticated, but I'll accept that because that's good enough. It's good enough. So I'll end the sharing.
And I mean, what we need are tools for expanding our understanding of things so that we don't feel so deprived.
Right.
And I mean, we are in some ways living in a time of deprivation, of having to do without the things we would like, the way we'd like things to be.
Yeah.
And the more the more generous we can be with the possibilities we give to ourselves, the better able we are to cope, and even come out of this. Well, if nothing else, we're going to come out of it older and wiser.
Cool.
Right.
One of our other participants has asked about what advice do you have for controlling weight gain and appetite changes? Example from anxiety, comfort eating during quarantine. Michael, do you want to try first on that?
Yeah, this is where I take out that card saying that's not my area. I mean, I could be, you know, the thing is that is so eating issues, eating disorders is not my area. Now, of course, I could say something glib, just don't eat so much. I mean, that's what I'm sort of telling myself. You know, it's not working so far. But anyway. So these things are complicated, and certainly that's not the focus of my practice. And so I'll have to just say, you know, I understand, I identify with the person, but probably because we may have something similar there, but I can't really say much.
How are you, Wanda?
Well, I think there would be something quite hypocritical in my giving people advice about their relationship with food. I can't say that my own is the healthiest. And you know, we all know what we would need to do. The more interesting question is what's stopping us from doing it? You know, what stops me from making healthier choices? What stops me from drinking a glass of water to just check and make sure that I'm actually hungry and not dehydrated? What stops me from getting out and getting some exercise? Those can be fruitful conversations. It can also be that this is a temporary thing where, yes, this person is comforting themselves with food. And when they get out the other side of COVID-19, they're going to get busy again and it's all going to come off, and it'll just be one of the unpleasant memories. It's, you know, because I wouldn't want to pathologize it if it isn't in fact a pathology. And yeah, I'm sympathetic, but I really do think it would be hypocritical of me to give advice about people's relationship with food.
So something we kind of talked about before, there's a lot of stuff happening, especially south of the border, but even here around racial tensions and those challenges. I think that it's like, I don't know, with COVID, do we have more time to think about it, or is it just like, it seems like now there's a turning point in our culture. How are we supposed to engage that? I know a lot of people want to go out and join the protests, but then we're also supposed to social distance. How can we navigate, these very real challenges that we're facing as a society in light of this? And do you guys, have some advice? A lot of people.
I don't have an advice, but maybe something we could all think about. And Steve, you're such a leader. Maybe we could do something by internet, by Zoom or something. Because the thing is, I do want to get out there and I do want to walk with the protesters. I don't want to be violent, but I do want to be part of it. But that's also not good. And that's also bad, because that's going to raise the risk of my getting COVID-19 and other people's risk. So I have split loyalties here. So I have given some money to different organizations that are supporting the protesters at some level, but maybe some sort of Zoom could be done. I don't know.
It strikes me that it's a time when social media could be used effectively if people will be respectful and remember that they're talking to other human beings, and remember to speak in ways that they would like to be spoken to. Because it's easy for us to forget that there are real people at the other end of the click of a social media button. But often social media gathers a real following and helps people to see that they are not alone in their convictions about what's happening and the change that is needed. And, you know, along the lines of having a Zoom session. And Steve, if you were going to do that, I think you need to bring some people whose lived experience is of being discriminated against, of being a visible minority. I'm looking at the three of us here, we're all pretty white. We probably don't know what it's like to live with that day in and day out. And we might want to give ourselves the opportunity to learn from people who could tell us what needs to change and why it needs to change. And then we should be listening very carefully.
Mm-hmm. That's good advice. One of the participants has asked the question, this is around church services. They miss seeing the other parishioners, but what they really miss is the sacrament of communion. The screen is no substitute. Something that's so central to the Christian faith is that kind of physical, ritual. How would you advise trying something new when something that's integral part of the tradition can't be done? I've heard of some ideas, but maybe you guys can start us off. Michael, if you want to go.
Well, I have to admit, I haven't even thought of it. And, I mean, that's a great question. I'll just say it's a great question. I have no great answer. Sorry.
I grew up in a tradition where there were no ordained pastors, and as long as you were male, you could offer the sacraments on a Sunday morning. So at the risk of being heretical, can we not do communion if it's done prayer? I'm not a theologian, and I grew up in a tradition that would have permitted that. Although I'm a good Anglican now.
Yeah. No, my tradition is very similar. One thing I saw online is the pastor of my former church. She said, "Can I make little loaves of dough that people can bake themselves at their home, drop it off at everybody's house. They can bake themselves at home, and then we can all take it online together. So it's all bread from the same kind of root and shared in that way, and they can partake together online." So people are thinking of creative ways to still have that connection to each other. But yeah, I think that's a very tough thing, but I don't know. Maybe it's a chance to branch out a little bit and try something new. So someone else asks that they feel like they have less time at home because their spouse is working and teaching online every day, and it's stressing them out. If you're living in a small house.
Was that my wife? It might be my wife. Was her name Kathy? It might be my wife.
No.
I
think it's probably pretty common because, yeah.
Okay. Too much self-disclosure.
Why don't you start us off, since you're a lived expert on this?
Well, I mean, I have to admit, I do struggle with that. And then she was actually quite supportive, especially because she knows that what I'm trying to do is helping people, and they need it, So I'm sort of mostly joking. She's very supportive, and of course, being a physician is a bit of a calling. People think it's so great being a physician. No, it isn't. Okay, so there's some good things about it, of course, but we won't talk about it tonight. But it can be, as you probably know, it can be extremely intense. It can be dangerous. Luckily, I'm not in danger from COVID-19 so much, but of course, there's pressures in terms of the intensity of seeing patients on Zoom, which is minimal compared to some of my colleagues and nurses as well and other professionals. So, but it is a calling. It's not a directly Christian calling, of course, but and my wife is quite aware of that. So she's actually an amazing wife and so very supportive. Actually, I was just joking.
Wanda?
It all depends on what the range of choices are that are available to a person, right? It's hard to answer that in the absence of knowledge about the real situation. And I mean, some of what COVID-19 is doing is drawing out of us the depths of our capacity. We're hitting our own limits, right? And feeling a bit desperate because we're wondering how long we can hang on. And yet, if our spouse has a job where, we can also be thankful that there's money coming in to pay the bills and buy the groceries. It's hard to live with the tension of resenting the way it's taking over our living space, and at the same time knowing we'd be worse off without it in different ways. I think many of us are going to look back on this time and say, wow, I discovered depths in myself I didn't know I had. And I'm deeply humbled by learning that I wasn't as capable a person as I complacently thought I was before I faced this challenge.
Mm.
Yeah. So I think we're nearing the end of our evening, and I thank you guys for coming. We'll do one more question from the participants, and then I'll do a little bit of housekeeping, but I wanted to thank you before we end off. So someone asked the question, what advice would you have for someone who's in a situation that needs to connect with different people outside of the existing network? And as an outsider in that given context, like how can you connect with new people in this kind of climate if you need to?
No, I'm not clear what the question is. You mean actually physically connect with them?
Or even just to meet new people. It's hard to meet new people.
Well, it's definitely hard to meet new people. Let me see. I mean, I guess one of the things is there's a bit of a misconception of psychotherapy as a field, and some people think that we give advice, and we generally don't. What we do is we will brainstorm an issue and look at many different sides of it and try to really get the person to examine the question in terms of their values and then the consequences of what could happen. Believe me, as a therapist, we've learned, I'm sure I have anyway, from bitter experience, when I give advice, it comes back to haunt me. Because the world is so complicated and life is so complicated. I couldn't possibly give advice of a substantial nature to somebody who's different. So for example, remember, I said that I'm an expert in psychotherapy, but I'm an amateur in life. And so I couldn't possibly tell somebody what to do. That wouldn't be reasonable because I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. I try to figure that out every day. And of course, my belief in God, my knowledge of different aspects of life, and my goals, my values direct me and help me, but they never seem quite enough to figure it out. And then I just have to wing it. I have to wing it.
I'm looking at the question, Steve, and it sounds like this person has an obligation to connect with people outside their existing network as an outsider in that given context, is what it says. So I'm not entirely sure what that context is. And I'm not sure that my answer is going to be helpful here, but I'm thinking that one thing that always serves well is to be curious about those people that you're needing to initiate conversations with, and a genuine interest in getting to know these people will be quite contagious often. You know, I think about being at a social event and having someone I don't know walk up to me and start a conversation. I can tell when they are really interested in getting to know me, and when they are bored out of their minds and, well, here's somebody I could, you know, so what do you think of them Jays? And it's like, I don't really care. But if somebody says, so why are you here? What's your connection to this place? And they're willing to ask me open-ended questions that say to me, they see me and they want to know me. I'm going to respond happily, and maybe we'll get a conversation going that we both enjoy, and I'll be thankful that they took the initiative. But unfortunately, Steve, I'm not sure if that's what this person is talking about. So it may be a totally useless answer to their question.
Right.
Sounded good to me. I feel better.
Well, I'd just like to thank you on behalf of everybody here. That was another great evening. Thanks for taking your time. It's valuable and appreciated. Just for those who are still in attendance, there's a little survey you can fill out afterwards. If you want to receive materials, I'll put together all the materials and we'll send you out in an email a link so that you can download some of the different resources that were shared tonight. And there's also ways to connect further to us if you are interested in that. But again, thank you, Michael and Wanda, for taking the time. Yeah, it was fun. And I hope we can do it again sometime soon.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you.
Wanda.
My pleasure. Good night, folks.
Yeah. Thank you, Fireplace. Bye-bye.